Hello, Shadowcat back, and today, how am I even going to approach this one? Today I have a large video to do, and I have been working on the script for this one all week, and there is so much for me to cover in this one that I have not been able to actually work anything out. So instead, what we're going to do is I'm just going to try and go at it. Because the subject I want to talk about today is the current cultural conflict in much of the West, and how, at its core, it's not a cultural conflict as much. It's not a political conflict or an economic one. It is, in fact, a religious conflict. And I want to talk about why, because it is a religious conflict, we can't actually solve it. There's a lot to cover here, and despite all of my trepidation, I'm just going to have to come out and do it. That's all there is. Sometimes you just can't prepare for things, you just have to do it. So here we go. This could easily be a 2-hour long video, and it's not going to be, but it could have absolutely been. I'm going to do my best to sum it up right now, though. And that way, it gives us a foundation to work from, and if you don't want to listen to this, then, you know what? There's your door out. So, here's my TLDR for this entire video. When we look at the conflict in the West, whether it's in the US, Canada, Britain, Germany, France, Spain, any of those places, anywhere where the progressive left has a foothold, we see the conflict, we see what they're doing in politics, we ask ourselves, what is the middle ground? How do we compromise? How do we fix this and reunify? And the answer is simple. We can't. We absolutely can't. And the reason is this. Once upon a time, we agreed, especially when we were setting up the United States, and to a lesser extent some of the other Western nations like Canada, to have a separation of church and state. Now, why is that? The reason is very simple, because if you go back in history to the kings of England, the kings were all ordained by the church. You were the king because you were ordained by God to be there. And the thing about religion and faith is that it is absolute. Let me ask you this. What is faith? Now, you can give me a few definitions, but the definition of faith is actually very simple. Faith is a belief that is not based on evidence. Now hold on, because I know we're going to have religious people out there and say, well, I have tons of evidence. I have a Bible, I have scriptures, I have scrolls, I have all these things. That is true. You have a book. But do you have any evidence in that book? Yes, if you read the Bible, you have evidence, or you have a story that says that Moses has parted the Red Sea. But do you have any proof that he did that? No. The answer is no, you don't. Moses led the Jews away from Egypt, and they spent 40 years in the desert. Have we found any of their campsites? Do we know where they went? Have we seen any evidence of it? No, we haven't. And that's okay. The fact is that when we take things on faith, hence, the phrase itself, we don't need the evidence. You can believe something if you choose to, and you don't need evidence to do so. So, I am an atheist, and if someone tells me God exists, I say, well, there's no evidence for that. But they still believe it, and why shouldn't they? I could also tell them that down in the farthest depths of the deepest trenches of the ocean, there is a worm who instead of using iron to bind oxygen in its bloodstream, it uses cyanide. And they might look at me and say, well, do you have any proof? And it's like, no. But the biochemistry, works out, so why wouldn't I believe that? It's the same concept. So, faith. It's a thing. And already I'm getting lost because there's just too much to talk about here. So when I talk about the divide, and I talk about faith, I say this because we have a division between church and state because you cannot argue with faith. And that's why the revolutions were so common in medieval history, whether you go back to Eastern medieval history, the feudal era in China, Japan, all of those, or the monarchies in Europe, is because if you did not have faith in your king, or you had a problem with your king, you can do literally nothing about this. The king was ordained by God, and therefore, to argue with the king would be to argue with God. And you just can't do that. God is perfect, and while the king may not be perfect, he is still ordained by God to be king. So you can't do anything about that. That is one of the reasons why, at least in the U.S., we prized, number one, having the ability to petition and a redress of grievances, and we did not build our government around the church. That is not to say that the church did not have any influence. Most of our laws were based off of religious laws. I mean, Christianity says thou shalt not commit murder. We have laws that say thou shalt not commit murder. It's pretty similar, for a good reason. Don't murder people. It's bad. But we did not allow the church to run the country. The church cannot get involved in the government. We will never have a bishop control the Supreme Court. Okay? We're not going to replace Congress with priests. And the Pope will never be the president. That's just the way it is. We did that so that we could have those redresses of grievances, because if it's the church is holy, the church is sacred, and the church is untouchable. But so long as it's not the church, we can deal with it as though we would deal with any other person. We can address our grievances. We can put them in the sunlight. We can air them out. We can have our day in court, and we can deal with it. And that's important. That is a very important point right there, because those redresses of grievances are something that we have lost. That isn't to say that the court has gone away. Obviously, the court has not gone away. But we see it at a lower level. We see it at the personal level, and sometimes at even the lower levels of government. And we see it primarily on the left. Because when we come up against minority issues, when we come up against racial issues, gendered issues, anything like that, there is a significant portion of the left that absolutely will refuse to even engage in the dialogue. If you try to bring up issues about black culture, you will immediately be branded a racist, and you will be silenced, if not outright punished. If you try to bring up issues about women, or men for that matter, in the culture, you will be branded a sexist, and you will be silenced or punished. And the same goes for any other issue that we find under the large umbrella that is the left. You don't see this as much on the right. For example, the right, which has for the longest time been the Christian right, you can come up to them and you can argue the religion. Now, if you do that, are you immediately branded as an apostate, silenced, and perhaps punished? Absolutely not. And you never have been. But that has become the standard operating procedure on the left. Why is that? That is the key question that we need to address right now. Because that right there is the source for the majority of the problems that we face at this exact moment. Because all of these things are bleeding into politics, And when they do, it means that now it's not just the issues that are sacrosanct, but the politics surrounding them and influenced by them have also become so. And when you can no longer contradict the law because the law is now sacred, you have gone back to having sacred rulers ordained by God, laws ordained by God, and you now have a religion in control of your government. That is the entire core of what we're going on, or what we're up against here. And I want to say that the reason is because what we have in the West right now, primarily in the US, but it is also in other countries, we are in the middle of a religious conflict. It's one that no one saw coming, except a very few people. It's one that no one was prepared for, and now that it's here, it's one that we're all going to have to deal with. The fact is, the left, as we understand it, the progressive left, is a religion. They don't have a god, which is why they're sometimes called a secular religion. But while they do not have a god, they do have everything else. They have hierarchies. They don't have priests, but they do have people who will preach their doctrine. And they do have a doctrine. They have words that you must say or must not say. They have actions that you either must take or must not take. They have guidelines for how you are to live. The Bible has the 10 Commandments, and the left has their own. So they have their leaders, they have their doctrines. You're not allowed to question any of it. And that's very important, because even people that are inside of that group are not allowed to question any of it. To do so is to be silenced, punished, and perhaps even excommunicated. Now, excommunication doesn't necessarily mean that you're being run out. It simply means that you will be cut off. For example, when the church would excommunicate somebody, it meant that, number one, they were no longer allowed in the church. All right, they can't go to the building. But it also meant that other people who were a part of the church would not interact with them. They didn't need to exile somebody from a community. They could simply isolate a person inside that community. We see that all the time now. We call it cancel culture. Because if you can't interact with anyone, then you can't work, you can't eat, and eventually you will either repent and come back, or you will simply disappear, either because you move or you die. It's that simple. And it's a very powerful tool that we've been employing for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's not unique to Christianity or even the Abrahamic religions. I'm sure we've been practicing this since probably back to caveman times. The left is a religion. Maybe they're not an official religion. It could be debatable, though. I mean, after all, most religions are tax exempt. Most of them have protected sites. They have statues, shrines, and everything else. And when you look at the left, well, most of their groups have tax-exempt statuses. Most of their establishments are recognized as protected land. They have statues, they have shrines, they have everything else. So, I don't know, they look kind of like an organized religion to me. So they are a religion, and I'm going to continue to call them that. So what does that mean for everything else? Well, one of the problems with religion is that it is absolute. It's also one of the reasons why we have had religious conflicts that have been going back through history forever. And to give you a really good example, I'm going to use the Abrahamic religions. Now, you have to understand, why are they called the Abrahamic religions? It is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The reason why they're called the Abrahamic religions is because, well, Abraham. He's in all of them. and he's a significant figure in all of them. Now, obviously, Christianity focuses primarily on the figure of Jesus Christ. Okay, that's fine. Primarily, it's because Christ lived, led, and died, and they focus primarily on the whole dying part, because it was in that dying part that Christians find absolution. For Jews, I'm not as familiar with Judaism, but I do believe it is Moses that they focus primarily on. I could be wrong about that. But it's primarily him, the way he led the Jews, the teachings that he got. If I recall correctly, it was Moses who received the Ten Commandments, and he gave them the basis for their entire culture. I hope I'm remembering that right. I'm going to feel really silly if I'm not. And when you get over into Islam, of course, they don't follow Jesus Christ, they follow the Prophet Muhammad. And Muhammad received their own doctrine directly from Allah, I believe. I know it's they worship Allah. I forget if Allah gave the doctrine directly to Muhammad. Either way, they follow that figure. He wasn't a savior, he was just a prophet, but he was the prophet that brought the culture to them. And Abraham was also there. I don't know the full details of that. Jesus Christ was also there, but he's only regarded as another minor prophet, and they don't really care about him. The point is, however, the three Abrahamic religions are very similar. They're very similar. But put a Christian community, a Jewish community, and an Islamic community all in the same place, and watch what happens. It's not going to be good. Bring a fire extinguisher. And why is that? Well, because they disagree. They disagree on a lot of things. But it's not necessarily that they disagree, it's that the disagreements cannot be fulfilled. See, because all of these things are taken on faith, like we don't know that Jesus Christ actually existed, or Moses, or Muhammad. We don't know. There is no actual proof. There is none of them have a name tag that we have dug out of the sand somewhere. But we don't need a name tag. All we need is faith. And faith cannot be proven wrong. And so when you have one religious group that says your leader is false, well, there is absolutely no proof you can give to show that their leader is false. And if you just insult their leader by claiming they're false, well, now you have started a conflict. And there is no resolution to this besides you backing down and acknowledging that what you said was wrong. Of course, why would you say that was wrong when you have equal faith that you're right? You don't need evidence, you just have faith. That is the core of religious conflicts and why they have been going on for thousands of years, and why they're not going to stop for another 1,000 years or more. It is a problem without a solution. It's a question without an answer. And so we get back to the left. Now, the reason why I say that the left is a religion is because everything they believe they have no real evidence for. We have seen it time and time again. The left have saints. And I say that because a saint is simply a person who has been elevated due to their stature in the community to represent a larger ideal. That is basically what sainthood is. When you look at Christianity, you have saints. You have people like Saint Michael. And Saint Michael represents certain things. I don't know. I just know that he is a saint. But he represents something. And so that's why people will light candles or make shrines to this saint, because it's not so much the person as it is what the person stood for. Basically, saints are the original memes. by saying one or two words, a name, saint, whatever, you are encapsulating an entire group of virtues, principles, morals, and ideals. All encapsulated in one person. It's brilliant. I love it. Memology. Make it a thing. Well, the left has that too. Because the left has gone so far, I'm not even making this up, they have gone so far as to enshrine in sainthood many prominent figures, such as George Floyd. There are people who literally call him Saint Floyd. And it went so far as during the trial for Derek Chauvin, there was an order from the judge that specifically said the prosecution could not make comparisons between George Floyd and Jesus Christ. That order would never have had to have been made if they weren't already trying to do it. That's what we call a mask-off moment. That's what we call a mask-off moment, which is when your true principles here are on full display. The same thing goes for people like Jacob Blake, Ahmaud Arbery, people who have been lifted up and used as an example, as a representative of a certain ideal, a certain principle, or in this case, pretty much all the same principle. Basically, just the fact that they are the suffering and they suffer at the hands of others. Point is, they have been elevated to sainthood, and you can't question them. They just are what they are. Where was I going with this? I've lost my place already. Like I said, there's a lot to cover here, and my notes here are woefully just inadequate. So you have these ideals, and you have this religious culture inside the U.S. Now, what do we do about it? Well, the short and sweet answer is you can't do anything about it, because there's nothing you can say that's going to suddenly make them change their mind. However, what can they do? Well, they are a religion, and every religion has one goal, and that is to spread. It's what they do. Every religion has missionaries who go out and do their work trying to attract more people to their way of life, and sometimes when that fails, they'll even go so far as to simply wipe out the people who won't. I'm looking at you, Islam. Yes, I'm calling you out directly. The Christians aren't doing it, the Jews aren't doing it, you're doing it. And so is the left. Because when the left goes into some place that they don't like the people, they may give an option for people to switch sides before they just start clobbering the other side with clubs. Christians have missionaries, the left has Antifa. Kind of the same thing. Except, generally speaking, missionaries don't carry baseball bats and shields. But they are doing everything they can to spread. And this is where the conflict is coming from. Because when they try to spread, when they try to take things over or to worm their way into institutions, well, there's going to be conflict here. The fact is, you can't tell them no, because as far as they're concerned, they are acting on the will of, well, their beliefs. They don't have a god, but they do have an overarching set of beliefs and philosophies that they're working here towards. You can't contradict those, so your options are either conflict or retreat, which is what they've been counting on. They're not going to change their minds, but you can change yours. They're not going to change their minds, but you can leave. And so all they have to do is just keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And the entire reason why I'm having this video come out right now is because earlier this week, late last week, I forget which it was, there was an article that came out on The Blaze. Now, I follow The Blaze because they are a news aggregator, and I tried like hell to find the source for this article, but it may not have actually been an article. I think it was actually a news broadcast or something. Not sure. Point is, however, that it's from NBC. And it says, an NBC medical expert says to carry extra masks on planes and coerce your neighbors to wear them. Now, the reason this came out is because in the last few weeks, a federal judge in the U.S. vacated the mandate from the CDC that said every public transport must force people to wear masks. That means the staff and the customers. And the judge said, you have grossly overstepped your boundaries here, and I am vacating this. It is no longer in effect. Naturally, this had the predicted responses. People on the right said, "Yay!" People on the left said, "No." And so what do they do now? Well, it's been vacated. There's no legal enforcement behind it now, and so most businesses said, fine, we're not enforcing this. We didn't want to in the first place. Of course, there's been legal challenges to it trying to reinstitute it, but this person has come out with a different idea, and what they have said is this: bring extra masks with you. And whenever you have to be close to somebody, then try to get them to wear the mask. Give them a mask and say, here, please put this on. And here's the quote from what they said. This person's name is Dr. Kavita Patel. And she's quoted as saying this: I know this sounds crazy, but if you tell someone next to you on a plane, N95 mask or surgical mask, and just say, or give them an N95 or surgical mask and just say, I've got an elderly mother at home. I've got a child with cancer at home. Please do me a favor. Having the people at least close to you in that row protecting yourself and them can be the best safety. Now, what this essentially means is lie. Lie to people to try to get them to conform. Now, when I first heard this, my first thought was this. All right, so you want to bring masks and try to convince people to wear them. For a long time, I have insisted that masks have been akin to a religious garb. Because the people in general across the U.S., not just those on the right, but even the people in the middle have been like, we didn't need masks before. The whole pandemic thing has been really mild. We don't need to wear these. But on the left, people have been very insistent to the point of apoplectic rage at people who have not been wearing masks. There was even a person of prominence named, I believe it was David Hogg, who used to be very prominent because of the... What was the name of the school? It was a school shooting down in Florida. And now I can't think of it. I have a lot of stuff going on in my head right now. But even he said that he was going to continue wearing a mask even after the pandemic was over, simply because he did not want to be associated with or mistaken for somebody on the right. Again, a mask-off moment. Figuratively speaking, because he wants to keep the mask on, but it's because he wants to portray himself a certain way. He wants to be seen a certain way. When I saw this article about the doctor telling people to lie, to coerce, to convince people to just put on the mask, I said, hold on. What if instead of a face mask, we said, when you go onto the plane, bring with you extra rosaries. And when you're sitting next to people, hand out the rosaries and just say, if you could just wear the rosary, the beads and the cross, just please, for our safety, for the safety of everyone, for the safety of you and your soul, just please wear the rosary. Would that be acceptable? What if instead it was a Muslim who came on board, and they brought with them extra niqabs? And so when they sat down, let's say that's, 3-person rows, so a 9-person block, they handed the niqabs out to every woman around them and said, here, please just put this over your head. What if it was a Jewish person who sat in the same seat, and he brought with him extra yarmulkes, and he handed one out to every man and said, here, just please put the yarmulke on? Would any of those be any more acceptable? Most people would agree, no, it is not acceptable. Then why is this? Well, the fact is that it's not. It's absolutely not acceptable. Depending on who you ask, though. Obviously, most sane people would say, no, it is absolutely not acceptable. But the people on the left firmly believe it. They do think, and some of them are actually carrying extra masks with them to do just this. We know this because we've seen the fallout from it. See, after the ruling was vacated, there were videos that came out all over the internet of people on airplanes and buses getting kicked off of them. And why were they getting kicked off of them? Because they were attempting to force the masks back onto people who had taken them off. This is actually no different than if you were to go over to a place like Saudi Arabia, and if they changed, or if all the women decided they were going to take off their niqabs and hijabs, the men coming back through and trying to force them back on the women. Now, if you're an Islamist, you're looking at that and saying, well, absolutely, yes. That's the way it should be. If you're Christian, if you're Jewish, or if you're any of the other various religions and philosophies, you're looking at that and saying, no, absolutely not. How is this any different? It's not. And why is it not? Well, because, as I have said several times before, we're not dealing in the realm of politics anymore. It's not political. It's not economic. It's not cultural in so much as it is religious. Now, granted, religion and culture very tightly intertwined, but you can't have a culture outside of religion. You can have a religion outside of culture. They're intertwined, but they are still separate entities. It's a Venn diagram, and there's a lot of overlap. The left is absolutely a religion, though, now. And that's a big problem. It's a big problem because not only are they a religion, they are still a political faction. The Democrats are primarily made up of the left. And so they have 2 feet in the door already when it comes to politics. And the thing is that when it comes to religion and politics, the reason why we kept it out is because you couldn't contradict it, you couldn't fight it, you had no redress of grievances. Which, if you're the religion in charge, is actually kind of good for you, after all. If your goal is to spread, if your goal is cultural domination and capitulation of the population, that's a really good thing for you. It means that you have total enforcement and you are unchallenged. That's one of the reasons why they are trying to push so many things through the federal government right now. It's one of the reasons why when Justice Breyer of the Supreme Court said that he was going to resign, they moved heaven and earth to get somebody else put in that place. And they didn't really care what anyone else said. They didn't care what any of the arguments were. In fact, any person who even attempted to argue that perhaps she was not the right person for the job was immediately called a racist. Or they were called a sexist. And quite frankly, try this. Try this in just your daily life. Every time somebody says racist, sexist, homophobe, Islamophobe, or bigot, every time someone uses those words, I want you to try this. Replace those words with heretic, infidel, or apostate. And see if it still makes sense. Because if you can replace those words, and the meaning of the statement really hasn't changed, then congratulations. You've just uncovered the whole left. It's not about racism. And people have been saying that forever. The left are some of the most racist people out there. It's not about sexism. They're also some of the most sexist. It's not about the protections for minorities. It's not about their treatment of minorities. It's always been about indoctrination and obedience, which is religion. And those who don't are heretics, infidels, and apostates. So try it yourself sometime. Think about it right now. Think to some of those articles you've seen in the news, or some of those news segments you've heard on TV or seen on the internet, where they talk about somebody who's being a racist. Well, just replace racist with heretic. Does it still make sense? Then there you go. When you see that, that should be a very eye-opening time for you. Eye-opening because it's terrifying. Eye-opening because it's now shedding light on the real problem in the West. In the U.S. especially, but the West as a whole. You cannot have reunification with somebody who, number one, does not share your values. And we can show that they obviously don't. When they come out and they declare people to be heretics, infidels, and apostates for simply disagreeing with them, there is no unification anymore. It's not possible. And secondly, they're not going to back off. So their entire thing right now is they want control. They want control of the Supreme Court. They want control over Congress. They want control over the presidency. They want control over media. They want control over education. I mean, look at what's going on right now in Twitter. With Elon Musk buying Twitter, look at the fallout from that. Again, I'm going to use it because it is such a wonderful word and I never get to use it that often. They are apoplectic. If you don't know what apoplectic means, go get a dictionary. But to give you a very simple answer, apoplectic is angry beyond reason. As in, there's no talking to them. There's no calming them down. The lights are on, but no one's home anymore. They are simply rage. Rage incarnate. Of course, apoplectic can also be applied to other things. I mean, somebody could be apoplectic with sadness, but it's usually whatever beyond reason. And right now, the left are entirely rage. And why is that? Has Elon Musk come out and said that he is going to ban the entire left from Twitter? You know, basically what they've been doing to the right and anyone who disagrees with them for almost the entirety that Twitter's been around. No, he hasn't said that. As a matter of fact, so far he seems to have been pretty even-handed with what he says he wants to do with it. The point is, however, they're losing control. And that is unforgivable. Because control is all they want. They want control, they want indoctrination, and they want obedience. And anything that doesn't further that is unacceptable. It's an offense. It's offensive to them. It's as offensive to them as it would be when We decided that we were going to take Bibles out of public schools. And when we did that, when we decided we were going to take Bibles, Bible study, prayer, and all of that out of public school, yes, we had religious groups that went absolutely insane. It happened. You can pick up any newspaper from back in the last, let's see, when would that have been? That would have been roughly like the 1950s through the mid-1970s in the U.S., where they decided to basically just clean house in the schools. Yeah, there were religious groups that said this is the beginning of the end. And I don't know, quite frankly, they might have been right, but that's neither here nor there. They're losing their minds because they're losing their control. They are now a religious group, and they're losing their church. They still have others, and they're still trying to control that one through various other means, but they're losing their church. And why is that? Well, because they don't want to negotiate, and they're not going to take this one on the chin and say, well, we lost this one. No, because that's not how religions operate. Their faith has been insulted. Their faith has been attacked. And the only way to handle an attack on your faith is to steel yourself and retaliate. And if you don't believe that, go back, read a history book, and look up the Crusades. There were many of them. Some of them were Christian, some of them were Islamic, and pretty much every single one of them was in response to something the other one did. And sometimes that was as simple as simply coming to a certain area and preaching. And they just wouldn't let that stand. That's what we're on the cusp of right now. And I don't use that term lightly. If you follow the news in the last 4 years or so, I'm sure you've heard the word civil war at least once. For a long time, it was only there on the outskirts of the news. It was the independent people who were way out in the extreme parts of it. But even now, if you listen to NBC, CNN, any of those places, even they're talking about the coming civil war. And there is a civil war coming. But it's not really a civil war. It's a crusade. And it's going to be a crusade because it is going to be basically the left are going to reach a point where they say, we no longer have any other options. We have exhausted every single other lever of power that we have. The only thing left now is to take up arms. And when one side takes up arms, the other side has two choices. They can either take up arms as well, or they can simply surrender. And surrender is not going to be on the table. It's just not. It's coming. And again, it's because we have a religious culture here that is absolutely incompatible with the secular culture that the rest of the country follows. The same reason that you cannot put a Christian group, a Jewish group, and a Muslim group in one settlement and have everything be peaceful is the same reason why we cannot have the left in the United States, or rather what the left has become. There is no better name for it other than the progressive left right now. But we can't have them in this country as well. One side or the other is going to have to go. Now the good news, I think, there is they're going to lose. They are a fervent group. I have heard some people call them a cult, just due to the way they operate and the way they hold their beliefs. And I find it hard to disagree with that. But there's not enough of them. That's one of the reasons why they have worked so very hard to control the levers of power. There's not enough of them to simply take over the country. But as... who was it? I'm going to say Socrates, even though I'm pretty sure it's not Socrates. Maybe it was Archimedes? I'm not sure. Might have been Archimedes. No, he was the water guy. I forget who it was, but it was some Greek philosopher who said, give me a lever long enough and I can move the world. They're right now looking for the biggest lever they can possibly get, and they more or less have it right now in the government, but even that's failing. Right now it seems like they've overplayed their hand, and they're set in the U.S. to lose everything. I mean, they already lost their church in Twitter. It looks like come the midterms in the U.S., they're going to lose Congress. Not the House, not the Senate. It looks like they're going to lose Congress as a whole. And if they lose that, then their lever is basically gone. They still have control of the presidency. They can still enact their will through executive order. But as we've seen with things like the mask mandates, the housing, the housing moratorium and all that stuff, even that power is not absolute. And so they're not going to be able to get as far with it. Sooner or later, though, it's going to have to come to conflict because they're going to have nothing left. And they either have to retreat and give up, which I don't think they know how to do, or they start their crusade. But there is no peaceful way out of this. There is no part of this story where we all come together and live happily ever after. And the reason is simple. You're not dealing with politics or culture anymore. You're dealing with faith. And faith, by its nature, is infallible, and contradicting it is heretical. And so that's why I keep trying to get people to understand, when you look at the conflict that we're in, whether it takes place in the halls of Congress or it takes place in the streets of Berkeley, we are in a religious conflict. It's not like any religious conflict that we've been in before. It looks much different. It's not, people in swords and armor and everything. But it is a religious conflict bordering on a crusade. And the only way that we can deal with it, the only way we can deal with anything, is to first recognize it for what it is. If you can't recognize it, you can't see it, then you can't do anything about it. Like they say, in order to deal with a troll, you first must learn its name. Well, I have given you the name. The progressive left is a religion. The conflict that we are going through is a religious conflict. And how do we deal with the religious conflict? I don't know. The fact is, we have been mired in religious conflict for the entirety of human history. We haven't solved those. We're not about to solve this one anytime soon. But it will have to have a conclusion at some point. I can only hope that when that conclusion comes, it doesn't leave the entire world in devastated ruin. Kind of a downer way to end this, but unfortunately that's the best that I can do. So I hope that gives you something to think about. I hope that gives you lenses with which to view the world. Again, as I said, before you can deal with a problem, you have to first recognize the problem. You can't deal with being overweight if you don't ever think that you are overweight. And for some people, that means that until they have a hard time fitting through doors, they never see the problem. Well, now I'm showing you. This is the problem in the West right now. See it, recognize it. Recognize it not just as a whole, but see it in the things around you. See the things for what they really are, and not just what people tell you they are. Use these lenses to evaluate the things around. Don't just listen to me. Use these as lenses, and then critically evaluate it for yourself. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments. If there's anything else you want to hear about, if there's a subject that you would like me to cover, I I invite you to leave it in the comments, and I will do the best I can. I'm always looking for new topics to talk about, even if I do them poorly. So if you want to hear more stuff like this, make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell icon to hear for every video when they come out. If you know somebody else who might enjoy this, or somebody who needs to hear it, share the video with them. Then come back, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and I will see you next time for the next message. And until then, take care.